Hi everyone, we are the Relentless group. Today we're going to discuss about Chapter 3 Bonds Payable and other concepts. So we have bonds. Ano nga ba ang bonds? It is a formal and conditional promise made under seal to pay a specified sum of money at a determinable future date and to make periodic interest payment at a stated rate until the principal sum is paid. So ang bond ay utang siya. Papel siya na may kasulatan na papahiramin mo ako ng pera at promise, and conditional yung promise ko na babayaran ko siya at specified time. Stilyado siya, may abogado, lahat ng formalities. Next, dito yung certificate binibigay sa kasunduan between the issuer and the investor. Anong tawag doon? It is bond indenture. Bond indenture is a contractual arrangement between the issuer and the bondholders. It contains restrictive covenants intended to prevent the issuer from taking actions contrary to the interests of the bondholders. So kapag ikaw yung bumili ng bonds ng isang corporation, syempre gusto mong i-protect yung investment mo sa kanila. Gusto mo ng assurance na mababayaran kanila. So magkakaroon ka ng several restrictions. Yun yung laman ng bond indenture. Sino ba ang issuer at sino ba ang investor? Ang issuer ay yung debtor. Siya yung humihiram ng cash. Siya yung magbibigay ng bonds payable. Ibig sabihin, siya din yung magre-record ng bonds payable. Sino ang tatanggap? Ang tatanggap ay yung investor. Ang investor ang nagpapahiram ng cash. Ang issuer ang humihiram ng cash. Clear? So sa next slide, ito ang mga laman ng bond indenture. Again, ang bond indenture ay kasunduan between the issuer and the investor. Specifications may include all call provisions and redemption rights. So ang call provision ay issuer's right to call the bonds before the scheduled maturity. Pwedeng i-call or sabihin agad ng issuer na babayaran ko na yan kahit hindi pa time ng bayaran. Yun ang call provisions. Issuer's right siya. Next is redemption rights. Redemption rights is the holder's right to redeem the bonds before the scheduled maturity. Ito namang redemption right ay right ng investor. May right siya na bawiin na yung pera na pinahiram niya bago pa yung time ng bayaran. That is redemption rights. Next is restriction and requirements may be imposed to the issuer such as sinking fund. Baka gusto ng investor na may sinking fund ka. Ibig sabihin, ready kang bayaran yung utang mo. Kaya may allocation of sinking fund. Next is maintenance of financial ratios. Sabi ng investor, i-maintain mo itong current ratio mo na ito. Kapag hindi mo ito na-maintain, kukuhanin ko yung pera na pinahiram ko sa'yo. Pwede din namang restriction on dividends available to the issuer's shareholders. So dito, pwede ang kasunduan may restriction na kung magkano lang yung ibibigay na dividend. Next is restriction on incurrence of additional obligations. So may restriction din kung uutang ka pa ba sa iba. Kasi kapag umutang ka sa iba, you're at a higher risk na baka hindi mo mabayaran yung hiniram mong pera sa investor. So bawal yun. Next is appointment of independent trustee. Ito yung mga katiwala ng investor. Usually the banks. Kapag hindi mo nabayaran yung utang mo, anong gagawin natin? And the authorized amount of the bonds to be issued. Next is interest rates, payment dates, and maturity dates are all included in the bond indenture. So next we have initial measurement of bonds payable through PFRS 9. Those that are not designated at fair value through profit or loss shall be initially measured at fair value less transaction costs that are directly attributable to the issuance of the bonds payable. Those designated at fair value through profit or loss, the bonds payable is measured at fair value. Anong mangyayari sa transaction cost? They are expensed immediately. Next, fair value is the same as the issue price or next net proceeds from the issue of the bonds excluding accrued interest. Subsequent measurement of bonds payable through PFRS 9. So subsequently, pwede daw i-measure ang bonds payable natin at amortized cost using the effective interest method and at fair value through profit or loss. Now we go with the premiums and discounts. Ano nga ba ang premium and discounts? Sometimes the stated amount is not the same with the net proceeds and received. Sabi dito, minsan daw yung stated amount ng bond na inisyu mo, hindi kapareha ng amount na matatanggap mo sa investor. Kaya nagkakaroon ng premiums and discounts. We know if it is cash or premium. Kung ang net proceeds ay less than face amount, for example, nag-issue ka ng 1 million bonds, tapos ang natanggap mo is less than 1 million, that is discount. Kapag naman ang net proceed mo ay more than the face amount, for example, nag-issue ka ng 1 million bonds, ang natanggap mo ay more than 1 million, that is premium. Here we have a problem. Twice ko issued 1,000 peso denomination, 12%, 3-year bonds for 1,049,737 on January 1, 20x1. Principal is due on December 31, 20x while interests are due every year and effective interest rate is 10%. First, magkano ba ang ating natanggap? Ang natanggap natin is 1,049,737. Magkano na naman ang ating face amount? Ang face amount natin is 1 million. Saan nakuha ang 1 million? Sa 1,000 times 1,000 peso denomination. So we compute now the premium. How much is the premium? We get the premium net proceeds minus fees. Ang 1,049,737 minus 1 million, we have the premium 49,737. How do we record? Debit cash, credit bonds payable, credit premium on bonds payable. So let's amortize. Sa table, meron tayong date, interest payments, interest expense, amortization, and present value. So ang interest payments, kinakompute siya face amount times nominal rate. Sa problem, ang nominal rate natin is 12%, ang effective interest rate natin is 10%. So 1 million times 12% is 120,000. Kaya siya 120,000 every year and to. Next, ang interest payment ay kinocompute as the net proceed times effective interest rate. So, ang net proceed natin is 1,049,737 times the effective interest rate, which is 10%, kaya naging 104,974. Next, paano malalaman ang amortization? So, malalaman ang amortization, we deduct interest payments and interest expense. So, may sobra kang 15,026. Bakit nga ba may sobra? Kasi now, you gain from the premium. Kasi itong gain mo sa premium, ginagamit mo ito para mabayaran mo yung interest expense mo. Binabangga mo siya sa interest expense mo para makatipid ka. So, how do we compute present value? So, ang present value natin is 1,049,737. We deduct 15,026 and we get 1,034,711. Ano ba ang goal dito? Kukompute mo na yun, so on and so forth pababa. Ano ba ang goal dito? Ang goal dito is by the year end, by the maturity date, December 31, 20x3, ay maging 1 million. Because 1 million is the face amount of our bond. So, ang goal, present value, dapat mapunta sa 1 million. How do we go there? We deduct the amortization. Yun yung sa premium. Now, we go to discount. Twice ko issued 1,000 peso denomination, 10% 3-year bonds for 951,963 on January 1, 20x1. Same na siya ng problem sa premium, magkaiba lang ng given. So, magkano ang ating net proceeds dito? 951,963. Magkano ang face amount natin? 1 million. Since ang net proceeds is less than 1 million, meron tayong discount dito. How much is the discount? We compute discount, net proceeds minus face amount, 951,963 minus 1 million is equals to 48,037. Yun yung discount. So, how do we record? Debit cash, debit discount on bonds payable, and credit bonds payable, which is 1 million.
Issuance of bonds between interest payment date. When bonds are sold on dates between the interest payment dates, the issuing corporation collects from investors the interest that has accrued since the last interest payment date. And when the next interest payment date arrives, the corporation pays the bondholders interest for the entire interest periods. Kapag natapos na po yung corporation's fiscal year, hindi sila magpa-fall on an interest payment date. The corporation must accrue bond interest expense from the last interest payment date to the end of the company's fiscal year. The accrual results in the inclusion of the interest expense in the year incurred. Example, in this illustration, on April 1, 20x1, MJ.co issued 12% on 1 million pesos bonds dated January 1, 20x1. Case 1. The bonds were issued at 97 including accrued interest. Cash proceeding including accrued interest, 1 million times 97%, 970,000. And less accrued interest sold, which is computed as 1 million times 12% times 3 over 12. And that is 30,000. And the carrying amount of the bonds on April 1, 20x1 is 940,000.
Yun, pagka sinabi natin compound financial instrument, contract pa rin po ito, no? That gives rise to financial asset on the point of view of the investor. But in the point of view of the issuer or the issuing corporation, it gives rise to financial liability and take note of the end this time now. Financial liability and equity instrument. That is why is defined by described by paragraph 28. So kapag normal na financial instrument, or lang yan. At kapag sinabing compound financial instrument, it is both contain a liability and an equity element. So ano yung mga example natin ng compound financial instrument natin, no? Common example, no, is bonds payable. At yung pangalawa ay convertible bonds payable. Yung share warrants, ito yung ginagamit natin that acquire the shares. Yung share warrants, it can be used to acquire the shares of the issuing corporation because sometimes it's difficult to acquire the share of the corporation. So, nagsabi tayo kanina na liability and equity, but this time presented separately.
We go to another example of compound financial instrument, which is convertible bonds. Those which give the holders the right to convert their bond holdings into share capital or other securities of the issuing entity within a specified period of time. This is an example of yung kanina na sinabi na sa halip na magbayad ka ng utang, is convert mo na lang siya to equity. Next, when issued at a premium or discount, amortization is up to maturity date instead of conversion date due to unpredictability of the conversion privilege. Hindi mo kasi alam if i-exercise niya ba o hindi yung conversion privilege. Ano yung amortization? Ang amortization and premium discount or discount is up to maturity date. Next, the issue price of convertible bonds shall be allocated between the bonds payable and the conversion privilege. Alin yung equity component? The conversion privilege. The same pa rin ang accounting niya kagaya sa bonds payable with share warrants. You get the total consideration or the issue or less yung fair value na yung liability component, makukuha mo ngayon yung equity component. So, let's try this problem. Alam natin kung magkano yung fair market value pag walang conversion privilege. Ibig sabihin, madali lang siya. So, we have 5 million times 105 equals to 5,250,000. Issue price of bonds without conversion privilege is 5,000 times 98% equals 4,900,000. So, para makuha yung residual amount allocated to conversion privilege is i-minus mo lang siya. So, ang sagot is 350K, that is the equity component. Bonds with share warrants. Ano ba yung share warrants? These are actually rights. Bondholders are given the right to acquire shares of the issuing entity at a specified price at some future time. Okay. Kasama ng bonds payable, wherein pwede mo siya i-acquire yung shares ng company at a price lower than bentahan sa labas. So, at some future time, specified din yung time kung kailan. For example, ang bentahan sa market is nasa 200 pesos. Dahil pinahiram mo ko ng pera mo, pwede mo siya isyuhan ng warrant. Pwede mo siya makuha sa akin ng 55 pesos. All or non-detachable. Pwede siyang detachable and non-detachable. Paalala lang, dahil compound financial instrument to, dalawa talaga yung binenta dito, which is bonds at share warrants. Warrants have a value and shall be accounted for separately. Then, you have to accounted it separately. Issue price of bonds minus market value of bonds ex warrant equals residual amount allocated to warrants. So, paano you have issue price of bonds minus ex warrants? Ano ba yung ex warrant? Ibig sabihin, wala siyang kasamang share warrant. Yung liability lang talaga. Okay. Yung bonds payable equals residual, that is the equity component, yung value ng warrant mo. Let's try na compute tong problem na to. Twice ko issued 5,000 10-year bonds, face amount 1,000 pesos per bond at 105. Each bond is accompanied by one warrant that permits the bondholder to purchase 20 equity shares, par 50 at 55 per share, or a total of 100 shares. The market value of the bond ex warrant at the time of issuance is 98. So, na-compute na siya kung lahat ng 5,000 na 1,000 bonds ay na-exercise yung share warrants, makakakuha ng 100,000 yung bondholder. 100K shares kasi per bond daw is 20. The market value of the bond ex warrant is 98. Pag bond lang daw ay 98 ang bentahan. Paano na-compute yung 5 million? 5,000 nag-issue ka raw ng 5K bonds times 1,000 equals to 5 million. Yun talaga yung inuutang mo. Market value of bonds ex warrant 5 million times 98 equals to 4.9 million. Yung issue price minus mo lang sa market value, you'll get the equity component of 350K.
The recognition of financial liability. A financial liability is recognized when it is extinguished. Example is when the obligation is discharged or cancelled or expires. When we say the recognition, it means the removal of previously recognized asset or liability sa isang entity statement of financial position. There are different ways to extinguish the liability. First is transfer of non-cash assets for asset swap. Transfer of non-cash assets is when a debtor settles an obligation by transferring non-cash assets to the creditor. Ang goal ng transfer of non-cash asset ay ibahin ang form of cash flow ng isang reference asset to avoid different risk such as interest risk or credit risk. Sa isang asset swap, yung investor po ay magbabayad ng fixed rate sa bank and in return makaka-retrieve siya ng floating rate. The difference between the carrying amount of the liability extinguished and the carrying amount of the non-cash asset transferred is recognized as gain or loss in profit or loss. If payment is less than the liability extinguished, then the difference is gain. If payment is more than the liability extinguished, then it is loss. Another way of extinguishing a liability is the transfer of equity securities or equity swap. When the terms of financial liability are renegotiated, such as debtor settles with reissuing equity securities, the creditor. Ito yung process wherein yung ownership of a share or interest sa isang property ay ito-transfer mo from one entity to another. In equity swap, yung cash flows are based on a predetermined notional amount. Hindi katulad sa currency swaps, sa equity swaps po, it doesn't imply the exchange of principal amounts. Yung exchange of cash flows occurs on fixed dates. Next is modification of terms. When the terms of financial liability are modified, an entity needs to consider whether that modification is substantial. Paano ba makakonsider na substantial ang modification terms of financial liability? Modification is considered substantial if the present value of the cash flows under the new terms, discounted at the original effective interest rate, is at 10% different from the carrying amount of the financial liability. If the modification is considered substantial, the original financial liability is recognized, and the new financial liability is recognized at fair value. So, kung ang borrower po ay mag-exchange ng financial liability for another substantially different terms with the same lender, the existing liability is recognized and a new liability is recognized. Kapag naman not substantial, the existing financial liability is not extinguished. It is continued to be recognized, but the modified cash flows will be depending on the modified terms. Next is troubled debt restructuring. A company that is considering debt restructuring ay yung mga nakakaranas ng financial difficulties na hindi madaling i-resolve. Under such circumstances, the company faces limited options. Pwede na restructuring its debts or filing for bankruptcy. Obviously, na mas okay na piliin ang restructuring existing debts. It is more cost-effective in the long term rather the filing for bankruptcy. In substance defeasance, hindi po siya nagre-release sa debtor ng obligation on the existing debt, which means outstanding. At sa ilang cases po, the creditors are not even aware of the transaction and they continue to look to the debtor for the payment. Lastly, is the offsetting of financial asset and the financial liability. It specifies that the financial asset and the financial liability should be offset and the net amount reported when and only when an enterprise has a legally enforceable right to settle the amounts and an intention to settle the amounts in a net basis. Dito po, it intends to either settle on a net basis or to realize the asset and settle the liability simultaneously. Offsetting is not appropriate for financial other assets that are pledged as collateral for non-recourse financial liabilities and sinking fund and the related financial liabilities for which the fund was established.